Let's do an overview of the code that we used in order to build out our testing application. So we had a little bit of styling there to make it look not as boring. And then up at the top, we had our HTML elements. So first of all, we needed an input to grab URLs. Then also we needed the user to be able to select a source or a resource that we wanted to make our AJAX call with. We know with AJAX, there's gets and posts, a couple different methods. So we wanted the user to be able to select that. And if they're posting, then we had a form here with some inputs. And these inputs are dynamic, so we could add as many inputs as we want because we're serializing this form using jQuery serialize. And then also we've got a button to trigger off our AJAX request, and then an output area to output that content. We connected to two different libraries, JavaScript libraries, very popular for AJAX. So there's jQuery, of course, and Axios. So they're two different libraries, and we hooked them both up. So we've got a link to both of those. And then we needed to make sure that our DOM content loaded before we added in our event listener to that input. So that's where we've wrapped it with the DOM content loaded. This is the same thing as jQuery does with document ready. And then we've got our event listener. So once the button gets clicked, so this button over here, we send off and we trigger a request to make request function. So that's the first one we have here. Over here, we grab some of those element information, and we can get rid of this one as well. So the console logs, we're using those in order to help work with our content, with our JavaScript. So we used a switch statement. So if it's jQuery, it sends over to this function, Axios to this function, fetch to this one, and JavaScript to the last one. Then we built out the functions. So we've got our fetch function. First of all, it checks to see if it's a post. If it's a post, we need some parameters that we need to add into the request. And that's the only real difference between the get and the post. With the post, we're sending over body, method, as well as headers. By default, it's going to use get. So we didn't have to worry about it when we were just using get. We're returning the content, the response information in a JSON format. We're catching any errors if they fail. And then we're outputting a response here if everything works properly. And we're using a function that we created, output. So this one allows us to nice and neatly output that content in a nice visible format. So that's what we were doing over there. Next, we looked at Axios. So Axios allowed us to do promises as well, but this is still using the XHR object, so JavaScript XHR object, whereas fetch is newer technology, so it's not using that anymore. And we needed to specify method, URL, and data. So it actually didn't matter if it's a get or a post. If it's a get, it will still take in that data and information, even though it's not receiving it or it doesn't have the capability to receive it on the server end. So it depends on the endpoint. Same thing, we're outputting our response information. jQuery, so we had our AJAX call in jQuery. We also, up here, we have our catch, so if it fails. Over here, we have our catch if it fails in jQuery as well. We used the done, so waited till we completed the AJAX call, and then we looked at our response information, send that back into output. And JavaScript was the same thing, so we're using that XML HTTP request object. We'd split off status from ready state because we know that whenever we submit, we get a different status error, so we get a 201 instead of 200. So we didn't want to look for 200, we want to look for 201. So that was the only real difference there. And then over here, whenever we're setting up, we're opening up that XHR object, the get was slightly different than the post. And we also had to specify headers, so we have a different content type, and we needed to set that within JavaScript. And then over here, we had the output. So this was basically outputting that content. And also, I wanted to quickly add here that, so we've got our output of the content, and I wanted to console log out some of these values here. So let's do that and quickly do a quick update so that instead of just console logging out the response text, let's do a little bit more. So the response text could be in an object format. And I'm going to do console log, and I'll make it colorful, so to do something a little bit different. So it's not your plain old boring black text. So this time, let's output the status. And over here, let's output the XHR. So we know that these are all coming in text format. So we can make them colorful. With the objects, you can't make them colorful. So you just do the %C, and you do that before you enter it, and then you comma separate it out so you can apply some styling. So let's make this one green, and we'll do the same for the XHR value. So this should brighten up our day within our console, and add that one. And maybe for this one, let's make this one red. So it's always going to be red. That one's always going to be green regardless. So that's it. And then we just output our text. What we did over here is we checked to see if it's a string format, because we always want to do the JSON stringify. So if the response text is a string format, then what we do is we turn it back into an object so that we can stringify it again. And if we didn't do that, then we get a bunch of extra backslashes. So some of the responses, so the only one that was actually not converting it into a JSON object was the regular JavaScript XML HTTP request. So that was the only one that was sending it in as text. And the rest of them, they were smart enough actually to know that there was a difference between JSON and text. So now let's try it out. So I've got a few other APIs. So we've got our default one here. So we can make requests, and there's our more colorful console content. Go to get. We can make some requests there as well. Here's another API. So we should be able to now just simply deposit new APIs and get response information. So that one worked. And we can try it against jQuery. And we really shouldn't have any difference now because we've got them set up running the same way. So that's basically how we can do that. Let's try one more API. So these are just some open APIs. And you can literally, now that you've got this application, you can try any one of the methods in order to make your AJAX calls. And they all seem to be working nicely. These ones don't have posts, so we're going to run into an error if we try to post. So this one, we've got an error through the error. This one throws the error down here in JavaScript. So we get undefined basically for the response text. So now it's up to you. So go ahead, try this out. Use the code that we've provided in the lessons and try it out for yourself. Also try different URLs. And this is now a good handy testing tool, as well as it gave you a lot of practice running and creating different types of AJAX requests.